Good morning and happy Shabbat. Welcome to the video, the fictitious language everyone wants to learn. Now, the subject of discussion is the language called Hebrew, and we recommend an article that is published on Wikipedia, although any article would do, and we are very confident that there is no article that you are going to read that is going to veer an inch to the left or to the right from what is contained in this article. We are not going to read it because it's too long. We're just going to give you some excerpts of what it says. We begin with what it doesn't say. It has no opinion, no fixed opinion on the origin of the language. It creates a general impression that the language was man-made and it developed from either Egypt or Phoenician languages of the Canaanites. The name Hebrew, according to the article, is Greek from Old French, which is from Latin. It is the language of the Iron Age kingdoms of Israel and Judah of between 1200 and 586 BC, and that it died from day-to-day use after the Jews' exile in Babylon, and it was replaced by an international language, Aramaic. Even though it died, it remained a liturgical language for use in the temple by rabbinical elites, and it died altogether in 200 CE. The article also says that the language was revived in the 19th century and caused the operation the only successful large-scale example of linguistic revival. Now you should understand that this was at the backdrop of Europe trying to create or recreate or restore the nation of Israel, which they did in 1948. The article also says majority of Bible scrolls were written in Hebrew. Now we have somewhat a lot to say about the assertions of this article, and we are going to begin at where it omits altogether the origin of the language. The reason why they omit the origin of the language is because that gives the Christian civilization a lot of power over very important scripture. Now they are the landlords of the language, and therefore they hold the key to understanding of the scripture, and everybody else has to listen to them. Well, let us deal with where the language came from, even though they didn't want to say it. In the book of Yahawaha, chapter 12, verse 25 and 26, and if you are to read it, you can say Jubilees, the book of Jubilees, and you read chapter 12. In 25 and 26 it says, "And Yahawaha Almighty said, Open his mouth, and his ears, that he may hear and speak with his mouth, with the language which has been revealed. For it had ceased from the mouths of all the children of men from the day of the overthrow of Babylon. And I opened his mouth and his ears and his lips, and I began to speak with him in Hebrew, in the language of creation. Well, they may consider this superstition, but this is what the owners of the language believed. Okay? The language came from the Most High. It is the language that the Most High uses. You can read in Acts. When he spoke to Paula, he spoke the language of the Hebrews. Everywhere he speaks the language of the Hebrews. And the one who is being told here to open the mouth of Abarahama is a Malaka. And that's how the language was restored after having been lost at the Tower of Babylon. So the language came from Yahawaha, Al-Hayama of Yasharala, creator of the Shamayama and the Eighth and all the hosts of them. It didn't have a name of its own. It pleased the Most High that it should be carried on the back of a people the Bible calls Hebrews. It was called always by a people. If you read Nachamayaha, chapter 13, verse 24, it is called the language of the Jews. But many other passages like Acts 21, verse 40, and others call it the language of the Hebrews. That's how it was called. Now, when you set yourself to know the Hebrew language, it is because you think that the Hebrew language is the language in which the scriptures were written, and therefore understanding it is going to afford you an opportunity to understand the scriptures more. That is the largest driver of many that wish to learn the Hebrew language. But the one thing that you should know is that you will never sit in a class and learn Hebrew. Instead, you're going to read Ivrit. You're going to study Ivrit. Now, is Hebrew and Ivrit the same thing? Let us read a little article. It says, Hebrew and Ivrit are essentially the same language, with Ivrit being the literal Hebrew word for Hebrew, pronounced Ivrit, while Hebrew is the English term encompassing all forms, biblical, medieval, modern. Ivrit specifically refers to the modern spoken language of Israel. Key differences between the two terms. Term usage. Hebrew is the English name for the language. Ivrit is the endonym, meaning it is what the language is called in Hebrew. Context of application. Outside of Israel, Hebrew often refers broadly to the language history or ancient text, while Ivrit refers to the modern spoken and adapted form revived in the 20th century. Evolution. Modern Hebrew, Ivrit, includes significant modern vocabulary, neologisms, and simplified structures compared to ancient or biblical Hebrew. Scope. The term Ivrit often emphasizes the contemporary living language of the state of Israel. In summary, when people speak of learning Ivrit, they are referring to learning modern Hebrew, while Hebrew covers the entire language spectrum from the ancient to modern. If you have understood this article, congratulations, you must be a genius. It is too cyclic for us to understand it. Yeah, this article says Ivrit and Hebrew are one and the same, but we demonstrated to you that these two are different in they worship the dragon part 4. For example, there's a point where they differ. One calls anointed Mashiach, the other one calls anointed Mashuach. So they are both wrong. They are both wrong, by the way. But we just want you to know that they are different, totally different. Before we go any further, let us first address the notion that has arisen in the article, which says that people discarded the use of the Hebrew language and began to use Aramaic. It is inconceivable. It is not true. When you read Nehemiah chapter 13, verse 24, you find that the only time that it is recorded that people used another language in place of the language of Hebrews was when the children of the exiles spoke the language of Ashdod and did not know how to speak in the language of the Jews. That was taken care of. They were chased back to their country together with their mothers so that they could not become a bad language living to those that could speak the language of the yahawaha or the Jews. So that's what it was. It was important for a person to speak the language of the yahawaha or the Jews, the language of the Hebrews or the Ibrahima correctly. It was righteousness, as we will see in the next video. Now, what language did they speak? First of all, the anchor point is Acts 2 verse 4, where it says they were all filled with the Rawachah Hakawadasha and began to speak in other languages. Since the Rawachah was giving them the ability to speak fluently. This was on the day of the feast of Shabbat, which the Christians or the Hebrews call Pentecost, which the Ivrit call Shavuot. This passage is saying, ordinarily, these people had a language in which they spoke. But on this day, they spoke other languages. What language did they ordinarily speak? And when he had given him license, Pawala stood on the stairs and beckoned with the hand unto the people, and when there was made a great silence, he spoke unto them in the tongue of the Hebrews. So, if the people did not use the language of the Hebrews, he would not have spoken to them in it. After all, this man who you call Pawala was well versed in a lot of languages. Not only could he speak tongues, he could also write tongues. He knew Latin, he knew Greek, he knew the one you are calling Aramaic, because he was well traveled. But he chose to speak in the language of the Hebrews because he knew that that is the language which they ordinarily spoke, which makes the assertion of the article that this language died from day-to-day use after the exile untrue altogether. Now, considering that Hebrew is not the language, is not the name that the owners called the language, but was coined by the Europeans, let us find out what Hebrew is in Hebrew. And there it is. And they are telling us it is Ivrim. Well, let us find out from the translator.
Hebrews.
Okay.
Hebrews.
That is Hebrew.
Latin.
That is Ivrit. Okay? You have seen those dots down there. Those dots are not decorations. They are the ones that make this word Ivrim. Ordinarily, in the actual language, they were never there. So let us remove them and see what they are going to say, if it is going to change.
Hebrews.
It is still Hebrews in Hebrew. And in
Hebrews.
in Ivrit,
Avarim.
it becomes Avarim. Okay?
Avarim.
So when you remove those dots from down those letters, it becomes Avarim. Now, we don't see anything strange about the sounds Avarim and Ivrim. They are perfectly tenable in English. English could have just said in the language of the Ivrim. Okay. But they chose to say Hebrews, which is not their name. Okay. So now we are looking at it this way. Whether it is written with dots or without dots, in the language which was originally spoken by the prophets, by the kings, by our patriarchs, by the apostles, by the priests, it is Ibarayama. So that the language is the language of the Ibarayama. The language of the Ibarayama is ancient, just like the name says. It is from creation. The language is spoken of in the article as if it just died a natural death. To the contrary, it was suppressed by the Christian civilization using Emperor Hadrian. It was suppressed with persecutions and killings. Where they thought that it would end by 200 CE, it did not. It persisted until 400 CE. That's when it went extinct. It cannot be revived. They are saying they revived it in 20th century. A man cannot revive that language. Only the Most High, the owner of the language, can restore it. And he has promised in Zephaniah chapter 3 verse 9 to Zephaniah chapter 3 verse 9. It says, "For then I will restore to the peoples a pure language, that they all may call on the name of Yahawaha, to save him with one accord." So, with the loss of the language, there was the loss of his name. And he is going to restore it in order to restore his name. He is restoring it in order to restore his name. All scripture was written in the language of the Ibrayama. If there are scrolls that were found to have been written in other languages, it is because the owners of those scrolls copied them manually from scrolls which were written in the language of the Ibrayama. And those scrolls normally came with a lot of corruption. But the Christian civilization actually prefers those scrolls to the scrolls that are written in the language of the Ibarayama. The additional thing that comes up in the article is that the language is Afro-Asiatic, meaning it can fit in Africa, it can also fit in Asia. We don't know about Asian language. We have had a little test of this language, and we can safely tell you that it is perfectly African. Come to think of it, Ivrim, Avarim, and Hebrew all sound European, but Ibarayama is perfectly African. Let us look at another name, Samuel. And they say its origin is Hebrew. Others say it is Hebrew already. Samuel is Hebrew already. There it is. So now let us hear it.
Samuel, Samuel. Shmuel, Shmuel.
Now we are going to read to you in the language of the Ibrahima. This is Shama Wa'ala. So both Samuel and Shemuel are European. Shama Wa'ala is African. It doesn't even make sense to call it Shemuel, nor does it make any sense to call it Samuel. But Shama Wa'ala, Shama in that word means name. It will never change. Anywhere you see Shama, it is name. And Wa is off, and Allah is short for Allahayama. So that Shama wa Allah is simply saying name of Allahayama. Simple language. Now that language does not change. It comes from a creator who does not change. He is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So should be the language. Now imagine a language that can evolve, in which very important salvific information has been written. If it evolves, it is complete disaster. Now the language itself is true to itself. When you see the letter Sha, it will always be Sha, no matter the word in which it is. It doesn't change. La will always be La. Pa will always be Pa. Whenever it is seen, it is true to itself. And it is also simple. They say that they have simplified the language. Do they mean that the Most High did not think when he gave us the language? That they are more wiser than the Most High, that they should change it and simplify it and add more vocabulary? No, they shouldn't think like that. And the language is also consistent, as you will see the next time we are going to look at the language of creation. When you set yourself to learn Hebrew, just know that there is no language called Hebrew. Nobody ever spoke it in the past. Nobody speaks it now. Nobody will ever speak it. It is a soft copy which Christian civilization changes as it suits their doctrine. And with it, they change. It is the handle by which they change what is written in the scripture. Normally, when you go to learn Hebrew, you are likely going to learn Ivrit. And it is not the original language in which the scriptures were written. It is not the original language that our patriarchs, Abraham, Yetazacheka, and Yaikaba spoke. It is not the language which our prophets, Mashaha, Marayama, Aharana, and others spoke. It is not the language which our kings, Dawayada, Shalamaha, Yahawashapata, and others spoke. It is not the language which the disciples of the Most High spoke. It is a European language. Shalom.